to provide opportunities and development for our teachers beginning Tuesday, beginning Wednesday. So I'd love to hear opportunities of how you turnkey this if you're not quite ready to dive fully into bookworms. Because my teachers will literally kill me if I go back and tell them I'm going to change the curriculum right now. So, open to your responses.
You want to answer?
I'm thinking, I'm processing. That's a lot.
Well, before you answer, did anyone here listen to that podcast on Ed Trust about Seaford?
Yes.
When they started, do you remember where they were in the curriculum adoption process? The reflections of the chief academic officer at the time? They had just adopted something else. They had just adopted something else, and here's a new guy saying that we're going to change again the same thing that you.
We had just adopted treasures.
Yes.
We had open court.
Uh-huh.
Then we had adopted treasures. And we had teams of teachers, because I was there then too. We had teams of teachers and district specialists writing and doing scope and sequence work and doing all this stuff. And then we came in, and the very next year, everything turned around. But we did start with the differentiated instruction block.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
I think it's an accessible gateway.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost, the book costs $28, so it's not something that you can't afford. So doing a book study with that book and saying, anybody care to try? That's a step that feels manageable to teachers. Another thing, anybody here could do choral and repeated reading.
Absolutely.
With any text.
Right, with any text.
Yeah, that's right.
As a regular routine.
I'm just going to throw this out there too. If you are struggling with secondary literacy, because I know that's a big struggle in my district, cracking the Common Core is another easy way to get strategies and do a book study, similar kind of process, to then whatever resource you're using, you can start changing the routines.
From a teacher's perspective, starting with the DI block, it's easy to get those quick wins because when you think, and it kind of goes a little bit back to the phonics instruction too, when you think about a general scope and sequence, a first grader might spend 9 weeks in short vowels, and then you go to blends and diagraphs and art control and you move on. When you're doing the DI block and you're differentiating that phonics instruction, you can start getting them moving quicker. And so they run in about a 3-week cycle. Some of them are longer with 6 weeks. But when you start seeing kids make progress every 3 weeks, those are quick wins to celebrate. And even, if you have some hesitant teachers to buy into that different way of teaching that systematic phonics, it's easy to get the quick win and the quick buy-in with them.
Anyone else? Quick question: if you could put on your time machine hat, when the results were low in the district and lowest in the state, what did people attribute it to? Was there? I'm just curious. What was the? Why did they think that was? I mean, what was the prevailing ethos about why the kids were struggling the way they were and why the system was struggling the way it was? Anyone?
Ms. Phillips,
Yeah.
can you tell us?
People thought, the community thought it was teachers. So it goes back to what Dr. Benson said about getting the right people. Well, Dr. P, getting the right people on the bus. And that was his point. If you don't want to get on the bus, you gotta go. So another part of the community blamed the kids, those kids. They can't learn, they won't learn. So it was different opinions about it. Our society has downplayed, I feel like, the role of teachers until COVID came, right? And they realized, we want them out of here, get them to the teacher. But it was a little bit of both, like getting the right people on the bus as far as teaching, and the people that wanted to be there and wanted to work with our kids, had a passion for teaching, not just showing up to a job. That's a big part of who is coming into your building. And as Mr. Benson said, those people who weren't there for that soon left. It didn't take them long to realize if I'm near retirement, I'm out, I'm going, closer to my home district. Those people left. So a lot of it was that, and then those kids. They looked at our population like they can't learn. You guys have those kids.
So I was hired by the district in 2015. So I remember being offered the position of director of special education. I was so excited. Right, I'd spent 20 years in special ed, and I was delighted. Each district only has one special ed director. And I called a person who I thought of as a mentor, and it still breaks my heart. And he said, "Oh, I want to do that down there." And I thought, how dare you, right? Like, these are kids in a community like anybody else's. And all I could think was that I have a skill set that I can bring, and that attitude of like, that Seaford didn't deserve it, or it was bad, or it was heartbreaking. And it made me angry. And then I was so delighted when I first came to Seaford, and I walked into my first meeting, and I felt like I'd come home. And I didn't understand how people could think that way.
I think this room can relate to that. There are a lot of folks here in different systems who have heard those kids.
Right.
Right? Whether it's Brooklyn or Savannah Chatham or Baltimore or Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Oakland. That's why they're here.
Yep.
Because we have, and the interesting is that's a lot of different places, but it just so happens that those kids are everywhere.
Right.
Just so happens.
Yeah.
So at a certain point in time, the question is, what did you do with those kids? And it sounds like, well, let me ask you this. If you could give them one thing, if you could say, hey, whatever you take away from this, make sure you do X. I'm going to give you a second to think about it, but I want you to be able to, is that all right? Can I answer? Just make sure you write this one thing down. I gave them a list of questions to ask and asked them the question. Forget them. So I'm just going to ask you, what's the one thing you would make sure they take from this when they leave? From wherever you sit, whether it's board or superintendent, wherever you research, whatever. Anyone want to start off? Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
I can start. When I came, to the board, I didn't have any education background at all. All I knew.
Next, someone else. One thing you want to make sure. Go ahead.
So, I'm Kimberly Hopkins, president of Seaford Board of Education. My one takeaway for all of you.
Just saying, you tell them your name and your role, and then.
All right, I'm Chandra Phillips. I'm the proud principal of Seaford Central Elementary. And alumni of Seaford. I wanted to speak to a couple things that Ms. Hopkins said, and the first thing was about this whole Central thing. Like, Central has those kids. And on the flip side of that, us who worked at Central, we took it as not offensive, but we took it as a challenge. Change up our school. We don't care who you send us. We're going to get the same sort of thing, because it's about, we know that the people who are in Seaford, they want to be there because they could go, 10 or 12 miles to the east and probably make $10,000 more a year. It's just that simple. So if they're there, they want to be there. Like my tagline this year was, "You chose to work here." So when things get a little rough, one of my teachers actually made me a shirt that said, "You chose to work here, Miss Phillips." I wear it so when things get tough, or when that one kid is cutting up and you're like, I'm like, you chose to work there.
Can I chime in? I'm Chrissy Jeanette.
And what's your role, Chrissy?
I used to be the principal at Blades. Now I'm currently the director of instruction. I want to piggyback on something that Chandra said. We really focused a lot in the district about relationships.
I'm Kelly Carbajal Hagman. I was the director of instruction in Seaford for quite some time. And I think that the most powerful thing that we did was believe. We believed in that the students could do hard things. And we believed that the teachers could teach all children. And we believed that our administrators would step up and be the leaders that they needed to be to guide and lead and promote the needs of the students and all students.
When you say you believed that the kids could do, I hear you.
Yep.
And so because you believed in students, therefore you did what? Therefore you approached it how? How does that show up?
That struggled in other places,
And I think
right?
there's also a piece there of like, you're gonna have folks, well, okay, you don't have to believe in it, but you're gonna do it.
You get to
And
that.
then you're gonna see the results, and then you can
That's
believe.
right,
So you
yes.
don't necessarily have to believe in it first. But it is helpful to have some of those early adopters and some of that evidence that it can work. Because, you know, you're not then just fighting against folks that just don't wanna do the new thing.
Thank you for mentioning that, because we didn't try to change anybody's mind. We didn't spend any time.
part.
We didn't try to change anyone's mind. We only changed their behavior.
Yes.
And when I said that we believed, that's because the leadership, the core, right? The core people believed that it could happen, so we drove for those results. And then, like Chrissy said, the snowball effect, more people started to believe because they saw the results.
And on an intellectual way, even if you didn't believe that it could work, you knew that you needed to do something different, right? Like we didn't want to be last, so we knew we needed to do something different. And so it's like, well, we can't get any worse than we are right now, so let's try this new thing, and if it works, yay! And so then you start building.
This is one of the key, so it's very, very important, and I'll come to you. I know you have your hand up, and I don't know if anybody else did, and there's someone there. So really quickly, if you look at the book Driven by Data and then Leverage Leadership by Paul Bambrick and Toyo, we use it in New Leaders. I used to be the executive director of Western Region for New Leaders for New Schools. And within that data-driven instruction framework, what he says is, you do not try to change beliefs. You change practice. And when the results come, then there's dissonance they got to wrestle with.
That's right.
Well, why did that happen? Now the beliefs can begin to change. But what a lot of system leaders and community advocates, where they go wrong is, they spend all their time circulating in beliefs. So we're talking about prejudice and racism and classism and this and that and your belief in all kids and all that stuff. And by the time you finish arguing with that, they're gone, you gone, and the initiative didn't die. The money didn't ran out. I just need you to, here's a template for the data-driven instruction for this cycle, for this, look at this standard, that they did 2 right on this one, and the same standard, this one they missed wrong, what did they get wrong? Why did so you drill down to the details of practice. Right. And then as that grows, then all of a sudden it challenges the belief system. So thank you so much for saying that. So much. Go ahead, you're right.
I'm Sandra Delbato-Klinsman. I'm Executive Director of ELA and Reading for the Rochester City School District, so Rochester, New York, upstate New York. So my question is from this.
Go ahead. Thank you for using it. Thank you. I appreciate it. You're even now.
So through this journey, and you might have kind of maybe already mentioned it, but through the journey, what did you purposefully avoid through this journey?
Wow.
We're trying to find out where the landmines are.
I try to avoid making decisions, A, too hastily, and B, without input or stakeholder engagement.
Thank you. Go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, I'm going back to
You're next.
the past where you're at the very bottom. At that point, I can imagine everything is on fire, right? How did you guys keep the priority, what the priority is, while dealing with all the fires of the day-to-day that we all see as a
Groups. For example, I worked at that time when we first started very much with multilingual learners. We were on a Title III improvement plan. We had, not only did we have the lowest scores for, every subgroup, but also for our English learners. And at that time, they were doing a separate curriculum. They were doing pull-out instruction. And I attended the training with Dr. Walpole, and I watched particularly the word study, and my eyes, because that's my background, is language acquisition. my eyes just became opened, literally and figuratively, that it is a language learning curricula, and they are going down to like the word, phoneme, sentence level, and that is what the English learners, because that's what I was always on the hunt for. That was my lens at that time. I needed to get us out of that Title III improvement plan. And that collaboration for what was a tier 3 and moving them into, they are not going to be taught in closets anymore. And we stopped all pull-out instruction. And that made a big difference. And it made a lot of people unhappy.
Yes.
We worked through a lot.
Never get them in. I wanted to come over here. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm Maggie Carrillo. I'm a structured literacy specialist with Albuquerque Public Schools. And so, thank you so much for asking the question, because that was one of the questions I was trying to ask was, how to get to those priorities. But then you also started talking about those 90-day plans, and that's something that in our district we work a lot on, is ensuring that every school has a 90-day plan to help improve student achievement. But when we look at those 90-day plans, we find that the goals are too big, too broad, and the action steps are vague. So what kind of collaboration, professional learning, do you all do collectively with leadership to make those 90-day plans actionable goals for the schools to keep moving forward in student achievement? Do they center around like a common assessment, those kinds of things?
So, when we were last in the state, we
I wanted to speak to the big fires, small fires, because of course as a building
You live
principal,
that.
you live it every day.
I got 1,000 small fires. But early in this, when I first became like an assistant principal, what a great principal. I learned so much from her. When we were making this transition to bookworms and focusing on the DI block, it was a non-negotiable. So, like on delays and things like that, it was like, you're going to do the DI block. Like, if you come to school 2 hours late, it doesn't matter. How do we develop our schedule so that every kid is still getting that that's a word I can't say. Differentiated instruction. So we made it a non-negotiable, and it was a small chunk. So we got all this stuff, but this right here is what you're going to do every day, and then we follow up on it as administrators. So that's one of the things that I'm still continuing to learn, is how to take small pieces, focus on that for a period of time, because we all know if you put something in and you don't monitor, what gets monitored gets done. So I'm actually, working on that. For my growth is like, how do I zero in on the thing, and how do we stay with it, knowing that then we can build on that once we get it good. So just kind of focusing, which is going back to the big rocks, focusing on that big thing and monitoring it and making it a non.
I'm curious about how did you build that instructional lens for your coaches and your principals and assistant principals in order to coach DI, in order to coach structured literacy practices? I'm just curious how you built that knowledge.
Well, I'll speak for myself. We attended every training. That teachers had to go to. The administrators were there from the beginning. So we can't go into a classroom and provide feedback if you have no idea what you're doing. We also taught lessons whenever Dr. Walpole would come or our coaches would come, like right in the morning.
I can say that from the district office, central office leadership perspective, it was made very clear that it was a non-negotiable that our administrators were engaged in just the manner that Chandra described. And we had, at that time, we had some school leaders that were trained, had different expectations for their role, and we very quickly made clear what the expectations were. And that was one of our non-negotiables.
Quick question. So we have a variety of roles here, of people representing different systems and their roles. We also have the state president for the NAACP in Maryland here. And there are others of us here who have, we wear different advocacy hats with the various organizations, some in the NAACP, some in others. from an advocate, for those of us who are advocates in fighting for civil rights and social justice, is there something we should be advocating for to support this? Is there policy that needs to happen? Is it certain tools? Is it what from an advocacy lens? What supports this kind of work best? What are a couple things that got to happen from a policy perspective? Or maybe it's at the district level, at the board level. Could you give any recommendations at all from a policy perspective or an advocacy perspective? Go ahead, Dr. Warford.
So I think the one is that you're doing right now is getting ready to tell the story. And tell the story in all of its color, not sanitized. This was hard. This is what we did. Here's where we.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is a policy piece necessarily, but I think always encouraging folks to have honest conversations about race, about poverty, right? Different backgrounds. That makes us richer and more well-informed, and ignoring the lack of knowledge or the differences is not helpful.
Well, it's tricky because in places like Oakland, that's all we do is talk about race. I'm not playing. They'll tell you. We'll have a whole board meeting talking about race till we get so wound up, and they just shut it down. Am I lying? Literally shut it down. Everybody's walk out. We could do that for a whole year and not have any board agenda item covered. So there's a I'm serious. The same thing in other districts. So there's a healthy balance between talking about some of this stuff, is because it's important, and you want to have developed people, and you want to have people who can engage in different communities and all that. And we're going to get to teaching and learning at some point, the nuts and bolts of instruction.
Right.
If that's not on the table, we could rotate in this sphere forever.
Sure.
At least in Oakland, that's how it goes. Maybe you guys are more. So there's got to be some sort of a balance. We want to develop people's cultural awareness and their cultural competence and all the rest. And guess what? On Monday when I come in your classroom, we on lesson 2.5. You need to be ready to go. Are there other questions? I know we're running out of time, but we could take one or two more.
Can I just say one thing?
Go ahead.
Because I want to add on to what Dr. Walpole said. Dr. Walpole spoke about telling the story.
Yeah.
And the data is a really important part of the story that needs to be shared. Because that's where the student outcomes are going to be visible and the learning is going to be visible. And I think that if you were to talk about a policy that needs to be moved forward, is increased transparency in the outcome data, that the curricula that districts are choosing, that the curricula that states are putting on their green lists, because many times they're not the curricula that have the data to prove their efficacy. And so I think that we need to push legislators to set the tone that we're not going to accept things just because a publishing company says it's good, or because a lot of other people say it's good, or because teachers like it. We have to see the data, because that's what's going to show us that gaps are being closed. Because data that's not just the all student data, but down to every single subgroup.
Well, that story I can tell, and I'm going to tell you tomorrow.
And this is okay. Cool.
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to show you the subgroup data.
Well, I will say this before we go, because we got to wrap up, because we got a bus driver and all that kind of stuff. But most people, not just in this room, but across the country, when they pick a curriculum, they never, ever really examine student achievement results. Never. I have talked to publishers, because most of them don't even do randomly controlled trials. They say, why would we spend, I kid you not, why would we spend millions of dollars on something they don't even look at? Real talk. I had one say, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. Basically, we're wasting our money. They don't care about results. They never ask about it. The committees don't examine it. So why do you want us to spend millions of dollars on something they don't care about? They want their social justice. They want their 3Qing. They want whatever's popping on social media. They don't ask about usability. They don't ask about learning curve. They dang sure don't ask about data. So you're talking about people having, so they're saying you want us to impact the supply, but what about the demand? We have to demand something that has evidence of working.
That's right.
That's the reason why we chose Seaford, because they're using something that has more evidence of students' achievement than any curriculum, bar none in the country, and most folks don't even know about it.
Yeah. Can I say something before we end?
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Specifically to the board members, one thing that we did 3 years ago, very intentional, was to relook at our policy, every single policy that we have within the district. And every school board meeting, we have about 4 or 5 policies that they go through, and revisions are either made or we do away with them because they aged out. And so I think that also helps somewhat on the local level as far as advocacy with our educators and making sure that we are modern in our approach of what we do.
That's beautiful.
So for the board members, if you can take that, Julie.
And can I piggyback off of my colleague? I was listening as you were talking about your board meetings can pretty much not cover what the agenda is.
Right.
And Dr. D and Jeff knows that as soon as, what do I say when I get in there? I'm like, okay, we're going to wrap this board meeting up by this time. Okay, because we're there to talk business.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about what I like, what you like. It's about business. When the board motions and approve that agenda, those are the topics we need to stick to. That is the business at hand that needs to be taken care of. So my lens is this. If those things are occurring in your district, then my question is, what is the board doing? Okay, it goes back to the board. Okay, and you know, so you can't have success for all students when you're not covering business to make them successful. So that's my take on it.
Yeah. And that'll take us out. Once you give us the one thing that they should take away, that'll take us out.
I hope that your visit today has shown you that these kids can. I hope you leave here knowing that your kids can. Get the right tools, get the right people, and all kids can.
All right now. Say the best of luck. Thank you.